as an African-American man who is interested in saving our students and uplifting our communities. He began as a science teacher and in the Tiger Woods Learning Center, which also resonates with me, and we'll talk more about that later. But he went on to Compton as a biology teacher. He's worked in cities like Watts, et cetera, as a biology teacher, a assistant principal, as well as a principal in the Alliance organization. Now he is working as a superintendent in the Aspire Public Schools setting. He holds a BS in secondary education biology from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. He also has a master's degree in advanced topics from Long Beach State, another master's degree in educational leadership. And right now, I'm proud to say he's pursuing his doctorate in educational leadership in our program here at Long Beach State. So I'm presenting to some and introducing to many others, the future Dr. Christopher Carr.
All right, thanks so much, Dr. Glass. It's an honor to be here with you all today. And quite an introduction. I'm just a regular person trying to do some good out here. So don't overthink it, y'all, but happy to be here. And I basically have forced Dr. Glass to mentor me. So that's actually how I ended up here. He didn't really have a choice. I've been chasing him around. So, but I want to share a little bit about my experiences as an educator and as a leader, and then also talk to you about what I'm honing in on for my dissertation. So I want to center this in a quote from J. Cole, one of my favorite rappers. Got a new album coming out on Friday, so be looking out for that. But this is the hypocrisy and the essential question about America. We are a country that values freedom. We talk about democracy, liberty, and then we have basically done the exact opposite during the entire history of this country. So I know there's been a lot of conversation lately about some controversial topics of whether or not America is a racist country or founded on racism. So got some bad news for you. America is a racist country and it has been founded on white supremacy. So hopefully that's not going to hurt your feelings to hear it, but it is the truth. For our allies, our white brothers and sisters that are in the room with us, I want to make sure that you know this is not an indictment on you personally. This is a criticism and critique of the system that perpetuates racialized outcomes for Black folks every year. A term I want you to hold on to is anti-Blackness. And there's the quote there from Dr. Michael Dumas that really explains it the best. What you should know is that white supremacy cannot exist without anti-Blackness. So there's this parasitic relationship between white supremacy and anti-Blackness. Your success and ability to navigate the educational system is truly based on your proximity to whiteness. So with those thoughts in your mind, I really want you to hold on to that as we engage in the dialogue today and thinking back to the work that you've already done in the school to prison pipeline. There's a theory that I'm using to do a lot of the analysis of my own research, and actually just on reviewing my own life journey, Black critical race theory, which also comes from Dr. Michael Dumas, who was a former associate professor at Cal State Long Beach. And so where are we going to analyze policies to determine how they're dehumanizing and oppressing Black folks? So what happens in the educational system because of anti-Blackness? You all have been talking about the school to prison pipeline. I want to center this in some data and some research. So Black students are overly represented in the disciplinary system, suspensions, expulsions. In addition to that, Black students are purposefully academically disengaged. A point that or term I want to introduce is academic disidentification. There's about 30 years of research on this that shows that Black students, particularly Black males, are more likely to academically disidentify, meaning that relative to their peers, they have a difficult time conceptualizing their own intellectual properties and abilities. So you don't feel good about your academic abilities. Black students have the highest percentage of arrests in schools, which is, there are some horrific cases in the news, and we're going to do a little bit of a case study later, where Black children are arrested by police officers. And the reason why this can happen, if you think back to that slide about anti-Blackness, is the dehumanization of Black folks. If we don't see you as human, then we can treat you this way. And so I have a picture of the school to prison pipeline on here, implicit bias and structural racism. But I want to let you know this work is critically personal to me. My mother is white, my father is Black. In Wisconsin, there aren't these separations of racial identities that way. This is before the idea of multiple races multi-race identity was popular or acceptable. So although I recognize I have white privilege, I've experienced anti-Blackness throughout my journey in the educational system. And surprisingly, this may be something that surprises some of y'all. I was a kid that a couple of moves go the wrong way, I 100% would have been incarcerated. I was a court involved youth is what we call it now, which makes it sound, pretty, but definitely was tracked and put in position to be unsuccessful and potentially incarcerated. In addition to my own journey, these are my cousins, and I wish I could tell you, we all grew up together. I wish I could tell you I'm sitting in a room full of doctors or lawyers. That's not the case. And it's not because my cousins weren't intelligent and I haven't been successful academically because I'm smarter than them. None of that applies. If you look at those quotes on the left and you applied those to my cousins, you would understand the position they're in and why. Brilliant young men, could do anything they wanted. The educational system has failed them. Why am I successful? I had just a little bit of cultural capital because of my whiteness, that I was socially acceptable enough to navigate the educational system. That's the only difference between me and those guys in the picture. So what am I studying? So let's pivot to some positivity. That was some heavy stuff, but let's talk about what could be possible. And so what I'm honing in on is looking at how to racially affirming spaces for Black elementary students connect to their academic identity. So how do we make you feel good about your racial identity, and how does that impact your own perception of your academic abilities? Because that's actually the biggest driver for academic success. How you perceive your abilities manifests itself in actual performance. So that's what I'm honing in on, particularly for elementary students, because I believe we catch students there, tell them that you're beautiful, tell you that you're smart, that the rest will work its way out as they travel through the educational system. So I'm using a framework by this young professor. His name is Dr. Coles out east, and he talks about Black education spaces, which are made up of three different dimensions: self-determination, self-actualization, and self-efficacy. The big picture here is, how do school systems create spaces for Black students to conceptualize disrupting anti-Blackness and also have a space to heal from racial trauma? So that's the big picture. So how do schools systematize this and build this in? And as a former school leader, this is some of the work that we did, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And as a system level leader, we are trying to operationalize these values to create safe spaces for Black students and empowering spaces for Black students, starting when they're in elementary school. So there's a few guiding questions that I'm using to really frame the research that I'm honing in on. How do students experience Black education spaces? We can have policies all day. How do we know they're working? We talk to kids about them. What do kids tell us? How do they experience them? That's the impact of policy. I also am trying to draw a correlation with the students that I'm working with on how is the racially affirming identity impacting their academic self-concept, which is, do I feel good about my race? Check, yes. How is that impacting my ability to navigate the educational system and my own perception of my own intelligence? And so below that is just a little bit of the rationale. I would also just want to highlight that Black students are problematizing education. We are not critical enough of the system that fails students. School to prison pipeline, which is the centering point of what we've been talking about. We hone in on the deficit mindset of Black students, and that is one of the problems that I'm attempting to address. Lastly, we don't do enough investigation of school systems that are actually being successful. There are outliers. We need to dive in on that. What are you doing to make this work? Here's a road map for the people in academia real quick from my research. For the rest of y'all, you're like, get through this slide. But the big picture here is that we've introduced a problem statement. Anti-Blackness produces racialized outcomes for Black students. There's research on racially affirming spaces, but not enough honed in on the experience of the Black students. Anti-Blackness is permanent. So Derek Bell, I would say the OG, the godfather of critical race theory, would say, well, anti-Blackness is permanent, and that without purposeful intervention, we cannot disrupt it. There's a huge gap in research about programs. How do we take these ideas that we know work and implement them? My exploration was done through talking to students. I interviewed 3 students, working with staff members, classroom observations, looking at policies, really reviewing them deeply for the possibilities for Black education spaces, and also where they were reproducing anti-Blackness. And so I'll get to kind of the conclusions later, but that's a quick overview of what the work was. So take a step back, just a little bit about the literature, right, to get a little bit more specific. Slavery is based on the foundation idea that Black folks can be commodified, that they are property. That leads to dehumanization, which leads to a police officer putting his knee on a African American male's neck for 9 minutes straight. Is that devaluing of life? You are property. You're not a human being. You're property. That's a historical context of anti-blackness, and it's ingrained in all of our psyche. And I know this is really hard for people to say. I'm not racist. I have friends that are this and that, and I voted for Obama. And yes, correct. White supremacy lives in your psyche, and because it does, so does anti-blackness. Without purposeful work, you will hold on to those ideas and not even know that you're doing it. What has this led to, this anti-blackness? Well, we've talked a little bit about it, but in addition to the structural barriers that are here, if you're a Black student, you're twice as likely to be identified for special education. And not just special education, the term we used to use was mental retardation. We use intellectually disabled now. You are twice as likely. And we can cross-cut that for income, state, anywhere in the US, and the data will say the same thing. Lastly, we know what works, but we are not exploring it. And the reason why is, again, because we know who it's going to benefit and who it's not going to benefit. The research shows racially affirming spaces for students helps their academic abilities, and there are social emotional benefits as well. So you're saying that was great, but what do we do, right? So where do we go from here? So for individuals and teams, if you're an aspiring educator, if you're thinking about going to administration, if you work in a school site currently, continue to just ask yourself some questions. In what spaces do Black folks have for their identity to be affirmed at our school site? Where does this exist? Where doesn't it exist? How are we collecting this data from our school stakeholders to understand what their experience is like within our educational system? And these are some frames that you can use to say, well, here are the things that are in place and here are the things that aren't. Expand your own awareness on anti-Blackness. Anti-Blackness is not just a Black-white paradigm. It exists in Latin America, right? It exists all throughout the world. You look at, and the worst part about it is that if you look at any population in the world, the darker complected folks that have been brought there are always at the bottom of that social structure. Interrogate your own implicit bias. Admitting that you're a racist is really difficult. You all are wonderful people. We're all racist. It's impossible to not be. But what you can do is work on being an anti-racist. And if you haven't read Dr. Kendi's book, it really provides you a framework to think through how to become an anti-racist. It's not good enough just to not be racist. From a systemic level, things that we can do, we know that in special education, we have SPED coordinators, we have ELD coordinators. Black students are typically underperforming in almost every school system. Let's introduce a person that can coordinate services for Black students and understand their experience. And that's something that we're doing currently at Aspire Public Schools. Each school has a pro-Black program coordinator. We rolled that out this last year. Continue to examine policies. If a policy is anti-Black, then we have to remove it. So if suspensions are always going to impact Black students, then we need to put a moratorium on suspensions. Not a popular comment for some staff members at school sites and school leaders, but it's what we have to do. Black education policy, Black education space policies. Let's call out in our handbooks how we are really going to support Black students. Let's put it on paper. This is what we're going to do for our Black community, which is really challenging. And to put to wrap all this up, the big picture view is that schools, here's how you know what schools value: what they spend their money on, what they spend their time on, and then what they put on paper. If these things don't exist in those spaces, then you know that they are devalued.
That is the conclusion of that part, but I want to go back for a second, brother Chris. As an experienced educator, being in multiple settings, I want to ask the question, kind of off script, to be honest with you, but I want to ask the question about boots on the ground and at the actual application of these things. Where is the roadblock? I know that it's easy to say it's the system, and it's easy to say that it's the teacher, but where is the vortex that we need to also address? Because in some cases, it is both, and it's one of those things where we struggle there, and it's going to lead us into our group discussion, but I want to ask that question.
Yeah, I mean, that's complex. So the first thing is it's us, it's all of us. We're raised in a system that makes us to value Black folks. So whether we explicitly say that or not, there's not this boogeyman, right? It's every single one of us. From an actual policy implementation, there has not been much energy at both the state or federal level to really improve the education experience for Black students. We want to start from 1965, right, civil rights movement, to now we have 50, 60 years worth of data that shows that we're failing our Black students. So it's not that we don't know, it's that we purposefully decided not to implement policies. And so what ends up happening is that individual school sites, school leaders, and educators have to be the disruptors. The problem is that the magnitude of that impact will not really create the change that we want. So we need to systematize and operationalize our values on disrupting anti-Blackness policies, staffing. All of that can be done from a procedural level. The state of California uses a funding formula that will allow school sites and school site stakeholders to determine what their programming looks like. There's absolutely no roadblock from this happening. It's just not valued.
And that's the awesome segue that do two things. Number one, it recenters the fact that we are looking at specifically in this two-part series, the idea of what educators can do to disrupt the school to prison pipeline. The struggle is always the same, and we all struggle with this, I have to admit, with what do we do? How do we actually operationalize this in real time? So in thanking Brother Chris Carr for that presentation, I'm going to hold on to him and carry him into this next segment, which is the group collaboration. So we are going to break up into smaller groups and kind of go through this process, but we ripped this from the headlines. This is something that's happening not far from here. It's in Oklahoma, but it happens everywhere. And I can tell you specifically, this happened also in the city of Orange Unified, where in the same case, we had students, in this case is Bentley and Rodney, and they are brothers, one in third grade Bentley, one in kindergarten Rodney, who went to school with Black Lives Matters t-shirts on, okay? Now, at school, the teachers and the administration asked the boys to turn their shirts inside out. So just reading the article, Rodney turned his inside out, Bentley turned his inside out. He was at PE, he went out and kept playing, but he was kind of like, what's going on? I don't get it. And the fact is, they called home. So the families called home, I'm sorry, the administration called home and said, hey, listen, not a good idea for your children to wear these shirts to school because they violate the dress code. The dress code specifically states that if there are sayings or logos that are in good taste and they're school appropriate, they can wear them. So again, now we've politicized the matter. Now we've taken this concept from Black Lives Mattering to attaching it to something like Make America Great. And they're dissimilar. Okay. So now the mother of Bentley and Rodney called the school, spoke with the principal, later spoke with the superintendent, and there were some assurances, there were some guarantees. One of the guarantees was that the children would not be punished. Okay. This was something that they could look through and look over. But again, in conversation with the media, the superintendent said, you know what? Mom came in hot and heavy. She's just angry and upset. I really wish she wouldn't do that. So again, I'm leaving that there so you can kind of unpack that as we go through. However, the next day, the three young men, and in this case, Bentley and Rodney and their older brother, who's in middle school, okay, they all went to school wearing the same shirts. And there's a cool shirt that I couldn't download, but it's from Facebook, and it shows all three boys sitting together, just cute little kids coming to school with their Black Lives Matter shirts on. So in this specific case, the very next day, Bentley, the third grader, he was made to go work in the front office and could not go outside and could not go to recess and be with his friends. The kindergarten student, Rodney, he had to sit there in the office until school was over because mom wouldn't come down and change his shirt. Okay. So again, this is part of what Chris is talking about throughout his presentation. So it's a larger conversation that we're going to have. What we want to do is go into our separate groups. When you go into your group, you're going to select the spokesperson for that group, and you're just going to go through and answer the questions I'm going to share with you in just a second. The idea is to propose a remedy. So again, you're going to look at the questions that are posed. You're going to answer with a remedy potentially on how to resolve these matters, because we're trying to operationalize what we're going to do moving forward. So one question, recognizing the issues. What issues exist in this real life situation? Number two, how is race manifested in this interaction? Number three, how can this situation be addressed in this short term and this long term situation or circumstance? That's our goal. That's our platform that we want to actually look at. And on the other side of this, we're going to have Chris kind of guide the conversation to see where we are with respect to identifying these things and moving forward. Are there wrong answers? Not necessarily, but from the point of view of recognizing the issues and seeing where race is manifested, it may be a learning process for some. And for others, it may just be glaring and you can't see the street lights because all you see is this light from above. So we're going to have you go into these groups for approximately 15 minutes. And we're going to check back with you at about, according to my clock, 12:40. Okay. So we'll go to the debrief afterwards. So Wendy, if you can send folks on,
On a
we'll
second, we have a just a quick question from Ellen. Are the students and family of African American descent?
They
Yes.
are. Thank you.
Correct.
Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you. That's my my error not saying that specifically. Yes, they are. Thank you.
All right, so you will be in a group of about 3 to 4, and you will have
Mhm.
15 minutes. And I'll let you all know when those 15 minutes are up. So you should have a notification to join the room right now. All right, welcome back, everyone.
All right, Brother Carr, we're gonna have you go through and I'll just split this all open and say I know a lot of people were sharing things that were not necessarily off topic. They were on topic, but I think I go against my better self when I always say, well, let's do a group when people really honestly want to talk. They want to share the experiences that they've had and find meaning in what's happened in settings that they've been in. And I'll tell you, however you want to kind of guide this conversation, Chris, you can, but we really want to just take a moment and debrief before we start to wind up this this conversation.
All right, thank you, Dr. Glass. I was able to hop in and out of your rooms, and I made some notes, but I want to make sure that we make this as organic as possible. Before we dive in, though, I just also want to acknowledge the fact that we're talking about situations that may be connected to people's own experiences and racial identities. And so there's a level of sensitivity we want to be cognizant of. Some of us have actually had experiences being put in the office, right? This over disciplining of Black students. I just want to acknowledge that and put that into the space. So, I mean, let's get into it. So, what's on top? What did y'all talk about? I know we had a report in each group. Why don't you just kind of do a quick whip around, and then we can kind of lean in where necessary. So let's get it. Let's go.
Okay, so in our group, we talked about the superintendent throwing the mother under the bus when she thought that everything was okay, but then she became portrayed as a stereotypical angry Black female in the media. So that was an issue.
Yeah, I'd like. Oh, sorry. I think it's cut somebody off. Go ahead. Did I cut somebody off? My apologies. I wanted to unpack that a little bit about the narrative that was put out about the mom. Let's dive in on that a little bit. What issues or challenges that we're seeing about power, race, gender, and just that small component of this case?
Josh shared in the chat misogyny. Thank you, Josh.
Also just the idea, like the angry Black woman, like whole idea is just that Black women are often like viewed or presented as, you know, a problem or angry or just creating like any type of strife, when in this case this mother's kids were, you know, taken out of their student instruction, were, you know, I don't know what the word is, just treated poorly because of wearing a t-shirt. And then that was turned as her fault in the media.
Yeah.
Marisol added also, sorry, Chris, Marisol added dehumanized in the chat.
One thing too that I also want to bring up is just the children and their psyche as they're sitting in this office. I'm a mother of a Black son. He's older now, but and I was telling my group mates that he was considered, one of the good Black kids. Schools always like that. He had no problems, but that was just because that was his personality. And there are plenty of good Black kids, right? But for many Black children, the office is seen as a punitive place. It's not the place, oh, we go see, the principal who welcomes us and stuff. This is a place where you go because you are in trouble. That's the zone, right? So to put a child, have them eat their food, do their homework, all of these things, it's a time for them to think that something is wrong with them. And even doing it one time can have a detrimental effect. But just imagine you go into a place, all of the office is buzzing around you, right? Everybody's walking, doing their things, Mr. Smith coming in, the teachers coming in talking, but you're sitting in a place where someone has told you that you've done something wrong. And all these kids did was wear a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, which they are Black and their lives do matter, right? So they were just doing what they're living. But just think about what their mind goes through as they're sitting here.
Want to lean in really, so if I could lean in real quickly, and I'll be quiet, I promise. This isn't about me, but to your point, I just want to name this really quickly. There's actually been research done on experiences of Black mothers in particular, what their experiences are when their sons are suspended, and what narrative that's reinforcing about the humanization and value and judgment of the parents is the other piece I haven't heard. That why is your child behaving this way? This case, nothing even happened, right? But putting that onus back onto the parent as opposed to problematizing the system. All right, I'm gonna be quiet. Y'all.
Speaking of onus, like in my group, initially I thought, well, let's make this a teachable moment. But then my group like enlightened me and was like, well, we shouldn't put it back on the kid to explain who they are and why they're wearing it. And I thought, oh, but it could be, what balance can we strike? What lessons can be learned here? And then I was also coming from a place of protection. And I said, well, it's a politicized, movement now when people see BLM and people are like, well, all lives matter and blue lives matter. And it's just, it's the message is so lost here. And it's just, it's heartbreaking.
I see Megan's hand. She wanted to talk.
So in my group, one of the things that we initially discussed was the fact of what is the actual policy that the student violated. And so oftentimes being an educator, I see my colleagues that are able to manipulate policies to support their own beliefs or their own thoughts, right? And that oftentimes our parents and educators are not even super versed in understanding what the policies that we are so-called, making kids listen to or forcing kids to assimilate to. We don't even understand what the policies are themselves, and it's left up to so much interpretation. And that was the first thing. And then the second thing was that oftentimes Black students are forced into either coercive assimilation or complete disenfranchisement. So either they're forced to completely assimilate, take on this good Black student character, right? Like they can behave in the same manner that their peers do, and they will be looked at as, oh, this is the epitome, this is the representation, or this is the outlier. Like this student's behavior and their academic prowess is the outlier. So I will, this student is great, you're fine, I want you to participate. But if other students don't know how to code switch, or they don't know how to assimilate, or they're not willing to assimilate, then they're disenfranchised and they're removed from the learning community, which is what we saw here with a third grader. Like a third grader sitting in the office all day, I can't imagine how much learning loss that child experienced in one day, not to the fault of their own, but because the teacher felt like the cross that they wanted to die on was not allowing the child to wear a Black Lives Matter, which also Black Lives Matter is an affirmation. So you're descaling this child, you're devaluing this child, you're then telling this child that you are not worthy enough to be a part of our learning community. And these are all things that are these are all traumatic experiences that are now going to shape how this child interacts in classrooms and the public school system going further.
I also think we need to talk about the interrupters of that, right? Who are the interrupters? Like, how many people passed through that office and was like, why is Rodney in here? What's going on? Like, who besides the person who put them there? Like, were there not anybody else that came through this office? Was the coffee that good that you bypassed these kids sitting there and wonder, like, what is going on? Why are they here? Where were the allies in that situation?
I think that's a really good question. When we talk about where do we interrupt, sometimes we talk a lot about microaggressions. What are those opposite kinds of things? Like even micro interruptions, like asking that question. I think that's an excellent example, Markeisha. I mean, when we talk about what is our role in disrupting, sometimes it's tiny little things like paying attention and asking those questions, you know.
Let me just add this one thing. When we look at this example, we have to go back, in this case, to our Padlet. And I invite you all to look at Black Minds Matter with regards to what Luke Wood and Frank Harris have just laid right in front of us. And the fact is, these two young men were suspended from school. And if we look at the definition of what suspended means, they had learning loss, not from COVID, not from being, in a situation, but literally because of an infraction, quote unquote, that took place in their opposite classrooms, in their individual classrooms, and they were placed in the office. And everything that Markeisha just mentioned about people walking by, I can speak to. I used to have, as an assistant principal, a line of students that literally would be sitting outside of my door. Teachers would walk by and ask them. Maybe they knew those kids and they said to themselves, "Oh, what are you doing here?" Maybe they didn't know those kids and they'd walk by and then they have a mental just register and they'd say, "Okay, that kid was in the office," because that's not good, right? You go to the office, and elementary school is different. Obviously, they don't all have assistant principals, but usually when you have an assistant principal, it's the discipline person. So again, if we go back to the Padlet and look at Black Minds Matter, you'll see a lot of this rolled out, and especially the addressing the policies that these come from, both at the district level and the state level, to correct these things. That's where a lot of this comes from and needs to be addressed specifically. Okay. I'm going to take a moment and pass this back, I think, to Wendy for our next segment. Thank you for everyone participating in the debrief of this piece. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Glass, and thank you everyone for such a rich discussion. We're almost at the end, but we do have two other guests, two current students that are part of grants. So Ms. Emily and then Ms. Ellen. So you are both co-hosts, so you'll be able to share any flyers or PowerPoints as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Yes, let me go ahead and share my screen so we can take a look at the flyer. Okay. So hi, everyone. So my name is Emily, and I'm part of the Urban Dual Credential Program. I actually just graduated from it. Well, I'm going to next week, I guess. But we finished classes last week. And I'm a part of the Tier 3 grant that just started a couple years ago. And I just want to share a little information about that. So if anybody is interested or you know anybody that you can share and pass along this information, and these flyers will be shared at the end as well. And so basically the Tier 3 grant, what we're doing in this grant is that we are being trained to provide Tier 3 intervention. So this is working with small groups or even just one student at a time and making sure that we are providing the intensive intervention that they need to succeed in class. So this is usually with reading. So what we do as part of the grant is that we get trained on how to provide effective intervention, as well as how to make database decision making. We implement different target evidence-based instruction intervention, and we get trained on this once a month, as well as attend different conferences. And we actually do this with students from local elementary schools. So we actually partners with the schools and the teachers, administrators. We talk to them, we have meetings, we discuss the data, and then we get trained and then implement what we're being trained with the students hands-on. And so that is kind of just an overview of what the grant is about. So scholars receive $33,855 over the span of 3 years. And again, in that, we have conferences paid for, our classes paid for, and this is for urban dual credential students, as well as school psychology students as well. So that is just an overview of the Tier 3 grant. And now Ellen is going to go ahead and talk about the BASIS grant, which is associated with it.
Yay, thank you. So BASIS grant is basically the same thing as a T3 grant, except for we're working on social, emotional, and behavior interventions in the multi-tiered system of support, specifically working with our students with disabilities and kids that come from culturally, ethnically, and linguistically diverse backgrounds, culturally, linguistically diverse. And this is my first year in the grant program, and I got into it during online COVID. So I've actually only had a few sessions with real kids, and it's been really amazing. The social emotional learning curriculum that we've been working with has just still sort of been working itself out. But I really think that this urban dual credential program is just a like amazing program, because I'm receiving my general education credential and a special education credential. And just within this past year, I've learned so much about our overrepresentation of Black and brown kids in special ed. And it's just is like, we need to work out so much. So I do encourage people to spread the word about the UDCP program, especially this grant, because a lot of people in my cohort didn't even know that it existed. And I'm only one of 6 in my cohort. And I'm like, yeah, I'm getting my master's, I'm getting my credentials, I'm getting all these extra supports and learning new things and meeting more people. And to me, it was kind of a no-brainer. So I love Cal State Long Beach and the UDCP program and the grants. So if anybody can spread the word, please do. And let us know if you have any questions, please. Thank you.
Thank you all. Wendy, did you want to share on some of the other deadlines that are pending for programs in case folks are interested and who they could reach out to?
Yes.
Okay.
So we do have upcoming deadlines for those that are planning to attend the fall semester for as a post-bac teaching credential student. So June 1st is the deadline to submit the Cal State Apply application so that you can start your courses in the fall semester for the post-bac teaching credential program. And also if you are interested in the master's degree in educational administration with the educational administrative service credential, their deadline is also June 1st. And we have other master's degrees in education, such as our master's in dual language development, our master's in curriculum and instruction. Their deadlines are June 1st, so that you can also start in the fall semester. We also have a specific scholarship for our post-bac teaching credential students. So other than these 2 grants that are a great opportunity for our school psychology students and our urban dual credential students, there is also the Mary Jane Patterson Scholarship for anyone in any of the credential programs. This is specifically for our post-bac students, so which means you're starting in the fall semester, you've completed your bachelor's degree, and the deadline for this specific scholarship is on June 8th. So we encourage you to apply to the university by June 1st, and you still have about a week to apply for this specific scholarship that they help you with your tuition. You have a mentor assigned to you. You have a small cohort of other students in different credential programs, and you have that support system throughout your whole credential program. And one last reminder, I will be sending a feedback survey to all of you that attended and those that didn't attend so that we can get your feedback, because we do want to continue this series in the upcoming academic year. So thank you, everyone.
I just want to give a special thanks to all of you for attending. We know it was very intense. In particular, thanks to Christopher Carr and to Stephen Glass for facilitating. Hopefully, Chris, we can have you back and participate more, because we have a lot of deep diving to do as we explore how to interrupt the school to prison pipeline and what our role is in that. So thank you all very much. I know some of you are in exams and finishing up, so all the best to you. And we hope to see you in our next session.